My name is Victoria Sterling. 20 years ago, my parents threw me out of the house when I was only 16, just because I was pregnant. I still remember the rain that night. One old suitcase, my mother standing at the front door, telling me I was dead to this family. 3 days later, my father even sent me legal documents officially removing me and my unborn child from every inheritance right connected to the Myers family. For 20 years, they told everyone I had moved overseas, that I had simply disappeared, until last week. My parents suddenly showed up at my front door with fake smiles on their faces because they needed me to bring their perfect grandson to their 50th wedding anniversary party in front of 200 powerful guests. The problem was, that grandson never existed. And what they discovered that night destroyed every lie they had spent half a century building. If you want to hear this entire story to the very end, comment 1 below. Because after this story, you may realize that your value was never supposed to depend on whether other people chose you or not. I was born into a family where appearances mattered more than real emotions. My father was a well-known real estate attorney in Portland. My mother was the kind of woman who always looked flawless at every church event, every charity gala, every family photo. My brother, Nathan, was the pride of the entire family because he was studying dentistry. My sister, Carolyn, was beautiful, obedient, and never once went against my parents' wishes. And me, I was always the extra person in my own home. I still remember those family dinners where my parents only asked Nathan about medical school. They praised Carolyn for her grades or her new dress. When I brought home a report card full of straight A's, my father would simply nod and say, "That's good, Grace," then immediately turn back to my brother. No one hit me, no one screamed at me every day. But there's a kind of pain that cuts even deeper than that. It's growing up slowly believing that your existence doesn't really matter to anyone. So when Marcus came into my life during the fall when I was 16, I made the biggest mistake of my life. Or maybe it was the only thing that actually saved me. I met Marcus at the city's public library, not at some fancy party, not at my private school, but between old bookshelves and the smell of paper worn yellow with time. That day, I was sitting alone crying after my mother forgot to pick me up for the 3rd time that month. Marcus quietly sat down across from me and asked, "Are you okay?" It was the first sentence in years that made me feel seen. And sometimes, all it takes is one person treating you with kindness to change your entire life. If you've ever known what it feels like to be forgotten by your own family, leave a period in the comments below this video. Marcus wasn't rich, he didn't come from an important family, and he definitely didn't attend the elite private schools my parents wanted me associating with. After school, he worked at his uncle's auto repair shop. His hands were always stained with grease. But for the first time in my life, I felt loved without needing to become someone else. We secretly dated for 2 months. Then, one afternoon in late October of 2004, I stood inside the restroom of a gas station, 3 miles from school, staring at 2 red lines on a pregnancy test. I remember my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it on the floor. I thought Marcus would run away. But instead, he squeezed my hand and said, "We'll get through this together." I wanted to believe him. But deep down, I knew my parents too well. The first thing they would care about would never be, "Are you okay?" It would be, "What will people think about this family?" And that Sunday night, I sat down at the dinner table with them, having no idea it would be my last meal in that house. That dinner was quiet, in the most terrifying way. My father was complaining about a real estate dispute. My mother was talking about the church Christmas gala like it was the most important event in the world. And me, I could barely swallow the piece of steak sitting on my plate. Finally, I put my fork down. "I need to tell you something." The entire table fell silent. I looked at each of them before saying, "I'm pregnant." The sound of my mother's fork hitting the plate rang through the room. My father didn't yell. That was even scarier. He simply looked at me coldly and asked, "Who's the father?" The moment he found out Marcus went to public school and worked at an auto garage, his entire expression changed, as if I had just destroyed the family bloodline itself. "You are not keeping that baby." I still remember every single word. My mother tried to say something, but my father suddenly stood up and stared at me like I was a stranger. "If you have this child, you are no longer a member of the Myers family." And in that exact moment, I realized I had just lost my family. By 9 p.m., I was standing outside the house with an old suitcase and a sweater completely soaked by the rain. The person who opened the door and threw me out wasn't my father. It was my mother. She pointed toward the gate and said, "You chose this." I still remember the warm yellow light spilling out from the living room behind her. I remember the shadows of my brother and sister standing upstairs watching me, but neither of them walked down the stairs. No one tried to stop it. I walked through the rain to a nearby gas station and called Marcus from a payphone. I was shaking so badly, I could barely press the numbers. 20 minutes later, his uncle's old pickup truck screeched into the station parking lot. Marcus jumped out and wrapped his arms around me without asking a single question. And I broke down crying like my entire world had just collapsed. That night, if it hadn't been for Margaret Torres, the neighbor who lived 3 houses away from mine, I don't think I would have survived it. She opened the door for me around 10 o'clock that night and softly said, "Come inside, honey. It's too cold out there." Margaret let us stay in the small room behind her house for 2 weeks. It wasn't fancy. Just an old room with a bed that creaked every time someone turned over. But to me back then, it felt safer than any place I had ever called home. 2 weeks later, Marcus found a tiny studio apartment in Seattle above a laundromat. The rent was $425 a month. The stairway always smelled like bleach and damp clothes. But we moved in anyway. 3 days after I was thrown out, I received a certified letter from my father. Inside were legal documents removing me from the family inheritance. He wrote that the Myers family no longer had any legal or moral responsibility toward me, or any child that may be born. I read that sentence so many times I memorized it. Not because it still hurt, but because I wanted to remember exactly what it felt like to be completely erased by your own family. If someone you loved has ever made you feel worthless, leave a 2 in the comments. Because sometimes, the people who understand that kind of pain the most are the strangers reading these comments with you. My daughter, Lily, was born in July of 2005. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and the loudest cry I had ever heard in my life. When the nurse placed her in my arms, I stared at her for the longest time and made myself one promise. No matter what happened, I would never let my child grow up feeling abandoned the way I did. Those first few years were incredibly hard. Marcus worked almost non-stop at the repair shop. Meanwhile, I studied for my GED and slowly took community college classes whenever I could while raising Lily. There were weeks when we survived on instant noodles and discounted bread from the bakery at closing time. I remember sewing layer after layer of fabric onto the same winter coat Lily wore, just to make it last a few more months. I sent pictures of Lily to my parents on her first birthday. No one responded. By Lily's second birthday, I stopped trying. And then, when Lily was 4 years old, a phone call in the middle of the night changed everything all over again. It was a call from the Seattle Police Department. A delivery truck had run a red light on Aurora Avenue and slammed directly into Marcus's car while he was driving home after a night shift. He died at the scene. Marcus was only 26 years old. I still remember what it felt like in that moment. Not the kind of screaming, dramatic pain you see in movies. It was emptiness, like someone had pulled all the air out of my body. I sat on the floor of our tiny apartment for hours, holding Lily while she slept in my arms, not knowing how I was supposed to keep living the next day. The insurance payout for Marcus's job was $12,000. $12,000 for a man who had given everything he had to love and protect us. I was 22 years old, a single mother. No degree, no family, no one left to call. I could have fallen apart then. But strangely, losing everything was the moment I finally understood that no one was coming to save me. And maybe that was the first moment I truly became an adult. After Marcus died, I threw myself into work like my life depended on it. Because honestly, it did. At first, I only took small jobs, decorating apartments for neighbors, repainting living rooms, helping real estate agents stage homes before selling them. I didn't have a design degree. I didn't have money. I didn't have connections. But I did have one thing no one had ever noticed in me before: the ability to turn a cold space into something that felt like home. In 2012, I met Eleanor Vance at a design workshop in Seattle. She had once been the creative director of a major company, and for the first time in many years, someone looked at me and said, "You have real talent, Grace." That one sentence alone made me sit in my car and cry for 20 straight minutes after class. Because sometimes, the person who changes your life isn't the one who gave birth to you. It's the person who sees your worth before you're even able to believe in it yourself. And Eleanor was exactly that person for me. Under Eleanor's guidance, my life slowly began to change. Not in some overnight success story kind of way, but through slow, painful, exhausting progress. During the day, I met with clients. At night, I studied design. And in the early hours of the morning, I sat at my kitchen table, calculating every dollar just to make sure I could still pay rent and cover Lily's school tuition that month. I was denied an SBA loan twice before finally being approved for a $50,000 loan in 2015. And with that money, I started my own company, Hearth and Home Interiors. My first office was just a tiny corner inside a shared workspace, so small that if I pulled my chair back too hard, it would hit the wall behind me. But I loved that place, because for the first time in my life, I was building something that belonged entirely to me. By 2019, the company had 8 employees. In 2023, Seattle Met magazine published an article about me with the headline, "From Teen Mom to Design Industry CEO." I shared almost everything in that interview, except my parents' names. I sat frozen in my car for nearly a full minute. My father had aged a lot. His shoulders had started to slump forward. My mother, though, still looked perfectly put together. Carefully dyed hair, straight posture, and that same expression in her eyes, like she was silently judging everything around her. 20 years. Not one phone call, not one letter, not one apology. And yet now they were standing in front of my house as if nothing had ever happened. When I walked up, my father looked at the house, then at me from head to toe before saying, "Grace, you've done pretty well for yourself." Not, "How have you been?" Not, "We're sorry." Then my mother stepped forward and said something that made the blood in my veins almost turn cold. "We know you have a son." A son. I stared at them without a single word. For months, they had apparently imagined some perfect grandson they could parade around in front of high society, without realizing the truth was far worse than anything they could imagine. If you were in my position that moment, would you have invited them inside? Leave a 2 in the comments below. I still let them into the house. Even now, I don't fully know why I did it. Maybe some part of me wanted to hear what they would say after 20 years of silence. My father sat down on the sofa, like he was inspecting a property he was considering buying. His eyes moved across the hardwood floors, the built-in bookshelves, and the paintings hanging in the living room. Then he finally explained the real reason they had come. On November 15th, they would be celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary at the Heathman Hotel. 200 guests, pastors, business owners, city officials, and they wanted me to bring my son to the event. "The family needs to appear complete in front of everyone," my mother said, as if that were the most natural thing in the world. Then, my father pulled a blank check out of his leather briefcase. $250,000. In exchange for 3 hours of appearances, a few family photos, and my silence. I stared at the check for a long moment before laughing. Not because it was funny, but because I finally understood something completely clear. In their eyes, I had never truly been their daughter. I was just a problem they believed money could fix. Before I could even respond, footsteps echoed down the staircase. "Mom, is everything okay?" Lily appeared wearing a University of Washington hoodie, her hair tied up in a messy bun after studying upstairs. And the second my mother saw her, she froze. "Who is this?" I stood up, walked over beside my daughter, and answered slowly, "This is Lily, my daughter." The entire room went silent. My father frowned as if he had heard me incorrectly. "Daughter?" I nodded. "Yes, the person you never wanted to exist." Lily looked directly at them. No hesitation, no fear. Then she said something that almost made me cry right there in front of them. "I know everything. I know you threw my mom out when she was pregnant with me." My mother immediately started stammering, trying to explain that things were more complicated than that. But Lily gave a cold little laugh. What part was complicated? The part where you abandoned a 16-year-old girl in the rain? And for the first time in 20 years, I saw my parents lose control of the story. I thought that after that moment, my parents would at least feel ashamed. But no. In less than a minute, my father regained his composure, like an attorney managing a public relations crisis. If it's a granddaughter, he said slowly, we can still adjust the story. I could barely believe what I was hearing. Adjust the story. Not apologize, not feel remorse, just figure out a way to make everything look better in front of other people. My mother immediately jumped in. We could say Lily just returned from overseas, a surprise family reunion. Lily stared at them like they were complete strangers. I was born in Seattle, she said coldly. I've never been overseas, and I'm not interested in becoming a prop for your party. The air in the room turned ice cold. Before leaving, my father turned back and said they needed an answer before November 10th. 5 days. As if this were nothing more than a business deal waiting to be finalized. But the second the front door closed behind them, I looked over at Lily and realized something very clearly. This time, I was not going to stay silent. That night, after Lily went upstairs, I opened the fireproof box that had stayed locked away for years. Inside was still the inheritance removal letter my father had sent back in 2004. The notarized seal was still there. So was the line stating that the Myers family no longer held any responsibility toward me or my dependent child. I sat there staring at it for a long time. And for the first time in 20 years, I didn't feel pain anymore. Just exhaustion from letting other people control the story of my life for far too long. Lily came downstairs, sat beside me, and quietly asked, "What are you going to do?" I looked at the invitation for my parents' 50th wedding anniversary sitting on the table. 200 guests, a live-streamed event, one fake perfect family, and I knew everything was about to change. Thank you for staying and listening to my story all the way to this moment. If this story made you feel a little less alone, subscribe to the channel and stay with me for the next part. Because sometimes, the truth takes many years before it finally finds the courage to be spoken out loud.